There's a powerful book that's been studied for centuries, but they'd rather you never touch it. It's not in the vault, it's hidden in plain sight. Every page is a blueprint for influence, control, and survival in a game that's rigged. Most people will go their whole life without opening it, and that's exactly how they want it. Alright, so we're going to talk about the most influential political book in history. As a little bonus, I'm not going to tell you the name of the book until close to the end of the video, but I'm sure the people that know, so timestamp when you figure out what book I'm talking about. It should be early on, but some of y'all not hip, and that's why you're here. Class is in session. Alright, so we're going to go back to Florence, Italy in the 1500s. 1512, there was a diplomat named Niccolo Machiavelli who worked for the Florence Republic. But that same year, the Florence Republic was overthrown by the Medici family. If you're not familiar with them, I'm going to do a separate video on them. But they basically funded the Renaissance. So we're going to cover that. But for this video, you just need to know they were a very powerful family. They were in power. They got overthrown, got out of power, and then they came back into power. And that's what we're talking about now. So now that the Medici family had regained power in 1512, everybody who was part of that last regime, there's problems for them. So Niccolo Machiavelli was part of that last regime. So as the Medici take power, he was accused of a plot to overthrow them again. He's arrested, interrogated, and tortured. Now, part of the torture, I thought this was interesting. It's called a strapado. I think that's how you say it. Sounds wild, but what it is basically is your arms are tied behind your back and you're kind of hung from your arms tied behind your back. Now, if you got good shoulder mobility, I'm sure you could last a little longer, but just thinking about that, I'm ready to confess now. Machiavelli doesn't confess, right? So he's released, but as a stipulation of his release, he's not allowed to hold any political office, and he's exiled to his farm outside of Florence. Being exiled outside of Florence, he has a lot of time on his hands, right? He's just chilling on his farm. Amongst other things, what he does was he kind of writes out a manuscript, and it's sort of a job application, right? He writes it to Lorenzo Medici, basically the highest up of the Medici family. So let's call him the overlord of Florence at this time. And what it breaks down is the value of Machiavelli, the fact that he understands politics at a deeper level, kind of like a resume, to come in and become one of Lorenzo's advisors. Sort of like if this was the mafia, they refer to it as a consigliere, someone that the highest level can kind of seek advice from. But nothing really came of it, and Machiavelli dies in 1527. So he kind of just lived out the rest of his life in obscurity, being banished to his little farm. And if that's how it was left, then probably would have never heard about him unless you're a real historian. But the reason we do know his name is that 1532, this manuscript, I'm not even going to say it was a book, was actually published. So it wasn't initially meant to be published. It was meant to get to Lorenzo Medici so you can see the value of Machiavelli. 1559, it was actually banned, primarily by the Catholic Church because they didn't like what it promoted. That was supported by a lot of the kings, rulers, monarchs of the time. Why? Because it's a super honest book explaining politics. So we're going to go over just a few main principles of this book and kind of correlate them to current events so you can have a better understanding. Now, the goal at the end is for you to be intrigued enough to go pick up the book yourself. So without any further ado, let's get started. So number one, he explains the type of states. States, principalities, basically just people in power. So you can reference this for president, king, whatever. So according to him, there's two types of states. And how you can look at this is basically old money versus new money, right? Meaning that you have groups like, let's say, the royal family in England, who've been in that position, lineage, for centuries. So there's generations that are born, live their life, die with that same family being in power, so they're used to it. That's a reason that they're really able to maintain their power, because it's just something that everybody's used to, right? The royal family of England is who they are. And then on the other hand, you have new money or new political office, like a Donald Trump, someone that came in with no political background besides funding politicians. And he came in. Now, it's people like that, it's a lot harder for them to maintain power because the population can quickly correlate. This is how it was before you came into power. This is how it is now. If I don't like it, we're going to try to get you out of power. Compared to the royal family, they've always been there, so there's nothing to really compare it to. Now, 2, he talks about different ways to gain power. So you have somebody that comes to power on their own efforts, like, for example, a George Washington. George Washington was a military commander, and then he was kind of thrust by the people into being the president. And once he was done being the president, he just walked away. He could have been the president a lot longer. He really could have became a semi-king of the US, but that's not what he wanted. It was once said that if he would have ran for president again and people were to vote, he might have got 100% of the vote. Then the second part is people that come into power by luck. So I would consider this like a LBJ. JFK had him as the vice president because he needed places like Texas votes to push him over the edge to become president. JFK won the presidency by the slimmest margin in history. So LBJ, where he was popular to those states, really helped him become president. But he didn't want LBJ as his vice president, really. Now, obviously, we know JFK was assassinated, and then through that, LBJ became president. So that's kind of a luck thing. Now, it's not really luck because we know it's a conspiracy, but what I'm saying is LBJ didn't run for presidency and win. And the third way people come into power is through other people. Now, I would say JFK won because of other people. The example I just used with LBJ, helping him get the votes in certain places, and also the mafia kind of rigging the election for JFK to come into power. Now, this is a dangerous one because if other people help you into power, number one, you're kind of at their whim, and number two, if they give you the power, they can take it away just as easily. Now, number 3, he talks about keeping power. He says the leader must be adaptable and be able to change in certain situations that make sense. So, for example, you get all these campaign promises while the politicians are campaigning for whatever office. And then once they go into office and they really look at the situation, they'll say, I can or I can't do this in reality. So you can say one thing, but you need to be able to adapt, because a lot of the times the stuff that politicians will promise on the campaign trail doesn't really make sense once they're in the office. Current event example is the Epstein files, right? We were promised we're going to get all these Epstein files, And then once they got in office, for whatever reason, they decided that it's not beneficial to release those. And the second point he makes to keep in power is you need to nip things in the bud, right? You need to deal with stuff early. So the border crisis, if that was dealt with by the previous president, it wouldn't be 20 million or however many illegal immigrants in this country. Now, because there is so many illegal immigrants, it's a lot more difficult compared to if the borders were just secure in the first place. So nipping things in the bud can keep the dam from overflowing, so to say. Now, number 4, he talks about as a ruler being feared versus being loved. And he says ideally it's better to be both. But if you have to pick one, you should pick fear. Why? All right, let's say you and your best friend commit a bank robbery together, right? And when you get caught, they don't know who the other one is and they want to know. Now, your best friend can love you to death, but if he fears doing 20 years in prison for the bank robbery, he's probably going to tell on you. So the fear of the prison time trumps his love for you. Now let's flip that example. You have the mafia, right? Same situation. The person that gets caught is more fearful of snitching and then getting whacked by the mob versus the 20 years. That fear trumps the other fear. So fear is going to trump love in most situations. So that's why he believes it's better to be feared than loved. Now, number 5, we have morality in politics specifically. So he says a leader should be religious, virtuous, honest, all that in public, but behind the scenes, they might have to be immoral to get the job done. So I would compare that to Obama. Obama is very elegant, very well-spoken, poised, all that stuff. But behind the scenes, he's doing drone strikes. He's doing whatever he has to do to get the job done. And that's how most politicians are, because their public perception is reality. Now, number 6 is how to deal with your subjects. So obviously you need to keep the population or the majority as happy as you can, because they're the base of your power. In this political system, they're going to vote you in or out of office. But the other key to that is your rivals. So you want to keep the voting population happy, but your rivals, you have to keep them in check. One of my favorite 50 Cent quotes that I actually live by.
You can't control what other people do. Like,
yes, you can.
No, you can't.
Yes, you can. If you already pose if you create a big enough example of what's going to happen to you, right?
Right.
By someone else.
So as you can see, he's saying that you can control what people do if you create a big enough example. If you walk into the classroom one day and people are making fun of you for a certain thing that you can't change, and you black one of their eye, the next day, everybody else is less likely to do it. Now, they still might do it, but there's certain ones who don't want their eye black that are gonna regulate themselves and watch their mouth. So to a certain extent, you can control what other people do. And 50 Cent shows this a lot, right? There's nobody who's said anything negative publicly about 50 Cent that he hasn't clapped back at. There's probably people who don't want to be embarrassed on the internet that just refrain from speaking on it. Again, like we were saying with Obama, you need to appear one way in the public, but do what you have to do behind the scenes. But try your best to either have somebody take the fall if something underhanded you did comes out in the public, or just try to keep it away from the public as much as possible. And other ways to control your public perception is through spectacles, symbolism. Political people are kissing babies, shaking hands, showing up at church, cutting ribbons on opening business ceremonies, all to control their narrative. They have PR firms that are behind them. And another way that the powerful and the rich control narratives about them, they buy media platforms, right? So you have Jeff Bezos buys, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, Elon Musk buys Twitter, and then they have a lot of say in how they're covered, at least in these platforms. So these are just 7 quick key points from the book. Obviously, there's a lot more. The world hasn't changed as much as we like to think in the last 500 years. And power is still vital. The Prince by Machiavelli, that's the book, lays out the rules and tactics of power in plain sight. Read it and you won't just see politics differently, you'll see people differently. Ignore it and you'll forever be playing somebody else's game. That's the video for today. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Follow me at Mr. Moquin on Instagram.